My name is Joanna Ellison, and by the time I turned 14, I knew exactly where I stood in my family. Behind the men, beneath the legacy, and beneath notice. My brother got a truck for doing less work than I did, while I was told to help out because I care. I swallowed my fury and made myself a promise. One day, I'd build something they couldn't ignore, and I wouldn't say a word about it until the day they had to watch. Hey there, before I dive into the first chapter of my story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. The Kentucky heat didn't just press against your skin. It settled into your bones like it had a claim on you. Our family farm was tucked into the low hills west of Bowling Green, where summer came early and stayed long past its welcome. I was 14, sweating through a hand-me-down t-shirt, pushing wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of straw across our dry-packed backyard, while my older brother, Wade, sat pretty in his brand-new Dodge Ram. It gleamed in the sun like a trophy, cherry red, spotless, and still smelling like dealership leather. I was so focused on the dust clinging to my arms that I didn't hear him pull up until the wheels kicked up gravel behind me. "Check it out," he called, leaning against the open door, grinning like he'd won the county fair. "Got it with Dad's bonus." I blinked. "Dad S what?" Wade didn't elaborate, just hopped down, keys jingling in his palm like wind chimes. He strutted past me without lifting a finger, as if I was just another piece of farm equipment. The bitter irony, he only worked weekends when he wasn't hanging out with Megan from church choir. I worked every day, morning to dusk, rain or shine. I shoved the wheelbarrow harder than I needed to, the metal groaning with strain. Later that night, when the mosquitoes were out and the fireflies blinked over the barn roof, I asked Dad why Wade got a truck, why he got a bonus. Rick Ellison, our father, was sitting on the porch, nursing a beer with the same blank-eyed calm he used when slaughtering pigs. He didn't even look up. "Because he earned it," he said. "I work too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every day." "You're a girl," he snapped, as if that explained everything. "You help out because you care, that's different." I stared at him. That moment, it broke something in me, not because I was surprised, but because I'd just been stupid enough to hope. So I nodded, walked away, and under my breath I whispered something I never forgot: "I'll never ask again." From that day on, I stopped expecting recognition. Stopped trying to prove myself to people who couldn't be bothered to look past my calloused hands or sunburned arms. But I also stopped waiting for permission. Because deep down, a seed had been planted. One I'd water quietly in the shadows while they weren't looking. And when it bloomed, oh, they'd see it. 14 years later, the barn still smelled like hay and diesel, but I didn't. At 28, my hands were still calloused, but they weren't just from pitchforks anymore. They were from midnight hours clicking over code, wireframing screens, and debugging features until my eyes blurred. I'd kept my word all those years ago. I never asked again. But I started building. Quietly. Crop Sync had started as scribbles in an old ledger, hidden under my mattress, right where I used to keep Wade's old Game Boy. Now it lived in my laptop and in the pockets of nearly 1,200 farmers across the Midwest, though no one in my family knew that part. Not yet. Most nights, after feeding the chickens and brushing down the horses, I'd climb the narrow stairs to my bedroom above the garage. That little space, half insulation, half dream, was where I coded until 2 a.m. sometimes later. I'd wedge my laptop on the windowsill to get better Wi-Fi and sip the instant coffee I brewed in a mason jar. No one ever asked what I was doing up there. At breakfast, I'd pretend I'd just woken up. "Wade says the co-op's giving him full lead on logistics," Dad said one morning, chomping into his toast like it owed him something. "Said they're even putting him on the supplier board next year. That's a man bringing something to the table." I sipped my coffee, let the bitter hit steady me. "That's great," I said. "You're still helping out with the feed runs today?" he asked, not really looking at me. "Yeah, after chores." Dad nodded like it was a given. Good girl. That phrase, after all these years, still tasted like rust. I didn't remind him that Wade hadn't done a single feed run in 2 months. I didn't mention that I had calls lined up with potential enterprise clients. Or that yesterday, a Chicago investor had offered to fly me out for a meeting next quarter. That would have been too much. because I knew what he'd say. Helping out is what daughters do. The silence between us was familiar now. A kind of cold truce held together by eggs, coffee, and denial. My mom had passed when I was 12. After that, meals became about function, not conversation. Wade learned to leave the table when Dad got sharp. I learned to stay silent. Wade says he might propose soon, Dad said, wiping his hands with the dish rag I'd just folded. Megan's a good girl. She is, I agreed, meaning it. And she was. Kind, sharp-eyed, and warmer than most people who grew up in this town. Megan had helped me once after a bad fall in the barn and didn't even flinch when I cried. She never talked down to me, never assumed. She'll make a fine wife, Dad added. The kind who keeps a man's house running. I bit my tongue. Megan worked full-time on her family's farm and took night classes in agricultural finance. But sure, keeps a house running. That morning, I mucked the stalls thinking about what it meant to be invisible in a family like mine. You could sweat, bleed, build something world-changing, and still be called just a helper. But I had a plan. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I watched Wade pull out of the driveway in that same cherry-red truck. It still shined even after all these years. Meanwhile, the tires on my Honda were as thin as onion skin. But here's the thing about silence. When you own it, it's power. I wasn't just helping anymore. I was building something under his nose, under all their noses. And they wouldn't know until the day I chose to speak. Dinner that Sunday smelled like rosemary chicken and obligation. I was on hour 13 of manual labor and hour 4 of biting my tongue, but Wade hadn't broken a sweat. He waltzed in with Megan like he owned the air, his boots still clean. Megan brought a pie. I brought blisters. We sat around the dining table, the same worn oak one from our childhood, the one with the burn mark from when Wade dropped a 4th of July sparkler on it. My chair still creaked in the same spot. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was about to. Wade cleared his throat and held up his glass. Well, he said, grinning like he'd already won the lottery, we've got an announcement. Megan blushed and held up her left hand. A thin gold ring shimmered under the dining room light. We're engaged, she said, and just like that, the room exploded. Dad slapped the table and whooped. That's what I'm talking about. He stood and clapped Wade on the back so hard it rattled the salt shaker. Knew it was common. Took you long enough, boy. I smiled because it was expected, raised my glass, took a sip, let the burn go down slow. Megan looked at me. Joe, I hope you'll be one of my bridesmaids. Of course, I said. My voice sounded normal, too normal. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've always felt like family. Always felt like it. I nodded. Dad was already talking about venues. We can clear out the Southfield, get the tents from McCulloch's, and your mama's wedding dress. Joanna, maybe you could clean that up for Megan. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. I stared at my plate. Chicken, green beans, cornbread, everything from our farm. Everything I'd had a hand in harvesting or hauling or cleaning. But all I ever got credit for was the side work. Wade leaned over, still giddy. We're looking at June. Figured that's best for travel and weather and, family schedules. June, specifically the second weekend. My stomach twisted. That was the weekend of the San Francisco investor pitch, the one I'd been prepping for months. The one that could push CropSync out of regional obscurity and into national distribution. If I landed that deal, we'd be in with Mid-Harvest, one of the biggest ag tech platforms in the country. I'm glad it's soon, Megan said. We didn't want to drag it out. Family stands together at milestones, right? She was looking at Dad when she said it, but he turned to me. Exactly, he said. You will be there, Joanna. That's not optional. Family shows up or you're no daughter of mine. Silence spread like spilled oil. I nodded slowly, my fork still in hand. I hadn't even taken a bite yet. I'll be there, I said. Not a lie, just not the whole truth. Dad went back to talking about caterers and centerpieces like nothing had passed between us. But Megan's eyes lingered on me, and something in her expression shifted. Like maybe she heard what I didn't say. Back in my room that night, I stared at the flyer for the investor event. The flight confirmation email was still unread. The deck I'd prepared was sitting in a folder on my desktop, polished, persuasive, full of data and vision. I clicked it open. CropSync, rebuilding the supply chain from the soil up. It was good. I knew it was good, but I closed the laptop anyway. I wasn't ready to blow up the whole dynamic. Not yet, not for them. Sometimes you hold your tongue not because you're afraid, but because timing is a harvest. You wait, you tend, and when it's ripe, you reap. I looked out the window past the dark barn roof where stars blinked like quiet warnings. They'd given me a choice, and I had made one not to fight, not to beg, but to bide. The dress I wore wasn't fancy. Just a pale yellow sundress picked up 3 years ago for the church's pancake breakfast. I hadn't planned to use it for something like this, but nothing about today was planned. Not anymore. I slipped on my boots, scuffed and soft with wear, and tied my hair back with a leather string. No makeup, no warning, no +1. I was supposed to be in San Francisco. I had the ticket, the presentation, the investor badge waiting for me at the check-in booth near Pier 27. But instead, I was in my car, windows down, driving toward the venue Megan's family had booked. A converted apple orchard just past Franklin, all whitewashed barns and Pinterest dreams. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Didn't RSVP. Didn't answer Dad's calls when I didn't show up for morning chores. I wanted to walk in on my terms. The parking lot was full of trucks and pastel sedans. I slipped between rows of them like a ghost, the scent of fresh-cut flowers and barbecue trailing through the breeze. The ceremony had already ended. I could hear the music from the speakers by the barn, soft country ballads with sugar-sweet lyrics. Laughter drifted through the trees. I stepped onto the patio just as the photographer snapped pictures of the wedding party near a hay bale arch. Wade looked sharp. Crisp shirt, tailored slacks, that too-big grin he wore when everything had gone his way. Dad was near the buffet, drink in hand, talking with Megan's uncle. When he saw me, his expression changed. "Look who crawled back," he muttered, loud enough for Wade to hear. I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I just walked toward the edge of the crowd, hands by my sides, boots clicking against the patio stones. And then I saw her. Megan. She spotted me across the garden and her whole face lit up. In the middle of posing, bouquet still in hand, she turned on her heel and came straight toward me. "Joanna," she said, hugging me before I could react. "You came." I felt stiff in her arms, still on alert. "I didn't think I could miss it," I said carefully. She pulled back, eyes scanning my face like she was reading it. "I've heard so much, thank you for coming, seriously." I nodded. "Congratulations, you look. I feel like I'm wearing a tent made of frosting, but thank you." That made me laugh. A short, surprised sound that felt like it belonged to someone else. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "I heard you canceled a big trip. Is that true?" I froze. "Maybe. I don't know the details," she added quickly. "But Wade mentioned something about a pitch. I just want you to know, whatever it was, I don't take that lightly." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't like the rest of them. There was something steady behind her eyes, a kind of awareness. "I guess it just didn't feel like the right time," I said, voice low. "Well," Megan said, looping her arm through mine as the photographer called her back. "I'm really glad you're here. I was starting to think this family didn't know how to treat you right." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words settled over me like a balm, unexpected and quietly defiant. She walked away, sun catching her veil like cotton caught on light, and I stood there alone on the edge of celebration. Rick watched me from the buffet table, his expression unreadable. Wade barely glanced up. But Megan, she saw me, really saw me. And that was enough for now. The ceremony was over. The vows were sealed, the mason jar centerpieces glowed under the string lights, and the scent of barbecue and cut flowers floated on the early evening breeze. I stuck to the outer edges where the noise didn't reach quite as sharply. I wasn't here for the music or the dancing. I hadn't planned to be here at all. But there I was, barely noticed by most, but very much present. Guests milled about the cocktail patio, sipping champagne or sweet tea in glass tumblers. Megan laughed easily with her cousins, the kind of effortless charm she carried like sunlight. For all of Wade's ego, Megan had grace. That rare kind that didn't come from schooling or breeding, but from having to learn how to read a room before you spoke. She caught my eye once and gave a little smile, one that said, "Thank you again for coming." But it wasn't her I came to find this time. I spotted Wade near the orchard fence line, jacket slung over one shoulder, collar undone, glass half full. He looked out of place for the first time in a long time, not the golden boy, not the heir apparent. Just a man trying to catch his breath on his own wedding day. I walked over, careful with my steps. He looked up as I approached, his eyebrows raising, either in surprise or suspicion, maybe both. "What, no toast?" he asked with a smirk. "I brought something better," I replied. From my crossbody bag, I pulled a small velvet pouch. The string was frayed, the fabric faded blue, soft from years of being opened and closed. I handed it to him. He opened it slowly. The watch inside caught the light just right, its old brass face worn from time and fingers, our grandfather-s. His eyes flicked to mine. "Joe, he said he'd give it to you one day," I lied. It had been promised to me. I'd been 10, bleeding from a sliced palm after helping him fix the irrigation lines. "You're the one who shows up," Grandpa had said then, wrapping my hand with a rag. "This'll be yours one day. Ellisons don't forget who does the real work." But that was a lifetime ago, a different me, and I had no use for talismans anymore. I had blueprints, revenue reports, leverage. "He would have wanted you to have it today," I said softly. "It should be passed down." Wade stared at it in his palm for a long moment, the kind of stare that dug for memory but came up quiet. "I don't know what to say," he finally murmured. "You already said enough," I replied, not unkindly. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I've had what I needed from it." He studied me, his forehead lined, not from confusion but from discomfort. It was the first time in years he didn't seem entirely sure of where we stood. "Thanks," he said. "You're still part of this, you know." "This," I echoed. "This family." I looked at him hard. I wanted to say, "You mean the family that doesn't ask where I disappear to at night? The one that eats meals I grow and never asks what I'm growing inside me." But I didn't, because I knew that would only put him on the defensive. And for once, I didn't need him to understand everything, just enough. "I guess I am," I said, voice low, "even if it's not the part everyone notices." He reached into his pocket and slid the watch inside like it was made of glass. Precious. Fragile. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I didn't think you'd show." "Neither did I admitted. "You looked good today," he said almost awkwardly. "Like yourself." I tilted my head. "That's because I am." Then, softer, I added, "I'm not here to prove anything, Wade. I just didn't want to miss her moment." He nodded slowly. "She was really glad you came." I turned to go, but then paused, my back half turned. "You know," I said without looking at him, "it wasn't the ring that made today matter. It was how she looked at me, like I wasn't a shadow." He didn't answer, but for once he listened. And as I walked away, I didn't carry bitterness in my chest, only clarity. The sky had shifted into its late golden hour, the kind that makes everything look softer, even memories. Cocktail hour had slipped into its easy rhythm. Laughter over lawn games, the clink of ice in tumblers, someone's cousin playing acoustic covers in the background. I wandered toward the bar, not because I needed a drink, but because I needed a moment, away from eyes, away from questions. The bartender raised an eyebrow as I approached. "Wine, whiskey, or watermelon fizz?" "Sparkling water," I said. "With lime." He poured, silent and efficient. I took my glass and leaned against the counter, letting the cold seep into my palm. I hadn't spoken to Dad all evening. He'd been holding court by the smoker, bragging about corn yield projections and Wade's future in the business like he was reading from a script titled Ellison Men Who Matter. I sipped and stared out over the field. "Bar's too pretty to stand it alone," came a voice beside me. I turned. Megan. Her veil was gone, her heels replaced with sandals. She looked lighter, like someone who'd shed more than just ceremony. "I needed a break," I said. "Same," she replied. "Half my relatives are already asking when we're having kids, and we haven't even cut the cake." She signaled to the bartender. "2 fingers of whiskey, please." I raised a brow. "Figured I earned it," she said. Then she glanced sideways. "So what do you really do, Joanna?" I froze. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she said, unfazed. "Wade mentioned something about you building an app, but he didn't really explain. And I like knowing who I'm marrying into." I stared at my glass. Thought about brushing her off. Thought about saying, "Oh, just some side project," like I always did when someone got too close. But Megan didn't strike me as someone who asked idle questions, so I told her. "I run a startup," I said quietly. "It automates crop supply chains, tracks inventory, predicts shortages, maps supplier routes. It's called Crop Sync." She blinked. "You're behind Crop Sync," I nodded. Her mouth fell open a little. "You're kidding." "Nope." Our farm signed up for that last month. My dad's obsessed. He's been raving about how it shaved off 3 days of turnaround, said whoever built it must have grown up around grain silos. I felt something unlock in my chest, something small and fluttering and dangerous. He's right, I said. We built it for farms like his, like this one. She shook her head slowly, then grinned. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. You've got code under those calluses. I've got a lot under these calluses, I said, and to my surprise, Megan laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone who saw the layers and appreciated them. I knew there was more to you, she said. The way you walk around this place like you built it but aren't allowed to hang your name on the mailbox. That caught me off guard. That obvious? Only to people who have had to earn their voice. I swallowed, unsure how to reply. She sipped her whiskey. I hope you know I didn't ask you to be a bridesmaid as a formality. I asked because Wade told me you were sharp. Quiet but sharper than him. I arched an eyebrow. He said that. Not in so many words, she smirked. But I can read subtext. I let myself smile just a little. So what happens next? She asked, voice gentler now. I looked at her. This woman who in a few hours would be my sister-in-law, who saw me clearly even when my own father couldn't be bothered to look. What happens next, I said, is I stop hiding. She nodded once, raised her glass. To that. I clinked mine softly against hers. The ice chimed. In that moment, under the twinkling patio lights, I realized something strange. I wasn't alone. Maybe I never really had been. Dinner was served under a canopy of lights strung between old sycamores and a whitewashed beam frame Wade and Megan had built last month. Long banquet tables ran end to end down the patio, covered in burlap runners and wildflowers in mason jars. Guests were laughing, scraping plates, refilling drinks. Someone was passing around caramel corn from a basket shaped like a tractor. Megan's cousin played soft fiddle in the background. I sat halfway down the table, opposite the groom's cake shaped like a grain silo. My plate barely touched. My seat was tucked in beside a distant cousin on Wade's side and an old high school teacher who didn't recognize me until dessert. Megan and Wade were at the head of the table, radiant. Dad was near them, his usual spot when there was a crowd and he needed an audience. I tried to blend in. That was always the safest move. Be present, not central. Be helpful, not loud. The conversation buzzed around me. Vendors, crops, Megan's dressmaker, the weather next week. Then it shifted. Predictably, Rick Ellison cleared his throat and raised his glass. I just want to say how proud I am of my son. That got everyone's attention. Wade's worked hard, Dad continued, his voice full of that practiced drawl he saved for public moments. He's done right by the family, by the land. And now with Megan by his side, this farm's future is stronger than ever. Applause followed. Wade beamed, squeezing Megan's hand. She smiled, but her eyes shifted toward me for a second. Just long enough to say, hold on, Rick wasn't finished. And let's not forget the backbone of every operation, the ones who keep it all running in the background. That's our Joanna, he added with a smirk. Our little helper. Laughter scattered down the table, light and harmless to most ears, but it landed in my chest like gravel. Our little helper keeps the barn doors closed and the hens fed, don't you, Joe? Dad said, chuckling as he lifted his glass again. Can't do without her. The kind of compliment that was really a collar. I didn't respond. I just took a sip of water, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Then from the head of the table, Megan spoke. Actually, she said clearly, I'd love to hear what Joanna's working on. A quiet fell. Not a heavy one, just a slow, spreading hush. What? Rick said, blinking. Megan looked straight at me, her voice easy but unmistakably firm. Your name's all over the AgTech journals. I read that article in the Midwest Growers Digest last week about crop sync. Dad's brow furrowed. What's that? She built it, Megan said, still looking at me. The app we use now, the one that's saving our farm thousands in wasted inventory. A cousin whispered something. The cousin beside me turned to stare. Rick looked from Megan to me like someone had just announced the moon had dropped into the cornfield. You! I set down my glass, the condensation leaving a perfect ring behind. I don't just help out, I said quietly. Dad scoffed. Come on, Joanna, you code on a laptop at night. That's not. That code feeds over 1,200 farms, Megan interrupted, her voice steel wrapped in silk. "It's automated supply chains from Kansas to Ohio, and it's making real money." Another silence, this one heavier. Someone down the table murmured, "Crop Sink, that's her." Rick's jaw tightened. "That doesn't change the fact that your daughter built something from the ground up," Megan said, her hand still resting beside Wade's. "Without anyone here even knowing. That's impressive, Rick. You should be proud." He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to mine. And in that brief moment, just a flicker, I saw something rattle behind his usual condescension. Doubt. No one clapped. No one toasted. But the silence was louder than applause could have been. I looked down at my plate again, but this time it wasn't in retreat. It was in victory. Because for once my silence had not been absence. It had been precision. And now they were listening. I hadn't planned to speak. Not tonight. Not with these people. Not after years of swallowing everything I wanted to say and sealing it shut behind polite smiles and lowered eyes. But something about Megan's voice, steady and unapologetic, flipped the switch. Maybe it was the way the silence curled around her words, the way everyone leaned just slightly toward me, like I'd stepped out of shadow and into substance. Or maybe it was the heat rising in my chest after being called a helper, one too many times by a man who'd never lifted a finger to understand who I'd become. Whatever it was, it pushed me to my feet before I could stop myself. I picked up a microphone from the DJ table. It had been resting quietly there, waiting for the first dance announcement. The DJ blinked at me, surprised, but didn't intervene. I tapped it once. The room quieted again. "I know I'm not the one you expected to hear from tonight," I began, my voice projecting more clearly than I thought possible. "But since I'm already here, and apparently our little helper has made it into the program, I figured maybe I should speak for myself." A few heads turned sharply. Rick's face hardened. "I've kept my head down for a long time," I continued. "Worked the fields, fed the animals, picked up shifts, filled in when equipment broke or deliveries were late or harvests ran lean." I paused, scanning the room. I did it because it needed doing, and because I thought, like most girls raised on farms, that loyalty was the same thing as love. Someone near the back exhaled sharply. "But tonight I'm stepping down." The words hung there, ripe and irreversible. I'm no longer working the family farm. Now everyone was listening, even the cousins who'd been half scrolling their phones. I've built something these past few years, something I started after midnight after chores, when the house was quiet and no one thought I was doing more than wasting my time in front of a screen. I looked at my father. "Crop Sink just passed $1 million in revenue this quarter." Gasps, audible, not dramatic ones, real, unfiltered, like someone had knocked the air out of the room. "I've already turned in my notice to the co-op," I said. "Next week I go full-time." Rick stood. His face was red, not from the heat. "You're making a fool of yourself," he snapped, his voice low but cutting. "What, you think all this exists without my roof, without my food? That app didn't come out of nowhere. You used my house, my internet, my name." Some guests murmured in discomfort. Megan reached across the table to steady Wade's hand. Wade looked stunned. "You're standing here like some business queen, but don't forget who paid the bills while you played around on that computer." I didn't look away. "I didn't forget, Dad. I counted every second of it." He stepped forward like he might reach for the mic. "You want to throw away your place in this family for what? Pride? Bragging rights?" "No," I said simply. "For peace." The room splintered, half stunned, half shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Megan clapped once, then twice, until others joined her. Some guests nodded, a few smiled, but others whispers. "She's always been dramatic. Rick's not wrong, who builds a business behind their family's back. She should have kept it private." Rick's jaw was clenched, his hands trembling. "You're ungrateful." "No," I said, "I'm free." I stepped down from the makeshift stage, handed the mic back to the DJ, who looked like he'd witnessed a tornado up close, and then I walked outside. Away from the tables, away from the buzz. My breath came fast and shallow, the adrenaline catching up to me. I just detonated every unspoken rule we lived by. But for the first time in my life, my voice didn't shake when I spoke. It sang. The koi pond behind the orchard venue was small, almost an afterthought, wedged between a gazebo and the edge of the parking lot. But it was quiet. lit only by the moon and a few floating candles someone had tossed in earlier. The soft gurgle of the water was the only thing steady about the evening now. I sat on the edge of the stone wall, my boots planted on the mulch, elbows on my knees. My dress was wrinkled. My hands still buzzed from holding the microphone. Out there, on the patio, the world had shifted. Inside, the music had resumed. Someone was dancing. Plates clattered. Life carried on, even when your insides were trying to rearrange themselves into something stronger than rage. I stared at the slow swirl of orange and white beneath the water's surface. Was it too much? Too soon? Had I made it about me when it was supposed to be their day? I didn't hear Megan approach until her sandals crunched lightly behind me. "Mind if I sit?" I shook my head. She folded herself down beside me, her wedding dress gathered around her legs like petals. Her veil was long gone. Her hair had loosened into curls, a few wisps sticking to her neck. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For hijacking your wedding, for making it about me." She was quiet. Then I heard her exhale, a sharp, trembling sound. I turned. She was crying. "Megan, no, it's okay," she said quickly, brushing her cheeks. "I'm not mad, I'm just—" She laughed softly, bitter and soft all at once. "God, I've been waiting for someone to say it out loud." I blinked. "Say what?" "That it's not okay to just keep quiet forever. That you don't owe people loyalty just because they fed you when you were small. That you can love them and still need to get away." Her voice broke. "I married into this family today," she said. "But you've survived it." That landed harder than anything anyone had said all night. She sniffed and looked at me, her mascara smudged. "You're not selfish, Joanna, you're brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was burning the house down. "Maybe it needed burning," she said, eyes fierce through the tears. "Or at least someone to open the damn windows." I laughed. It cracked something open in me. We sat in the silence again. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grass. Somewhere inside, a slow song played, Ben E. King, I think. The world felt slower here. "I never wanted to steal attention," I said, "but I couldn't let him keep erasing me." "You didn't steal anything," she replied. "You reclaimed space." I looked at her then, really looked at her, this woman who had no reason to defend me and every reason to stay neutral. But she hadn't. "You're not who I expected Wade to marry," I said. She smiled. "Good." Then, after a moment, "For what it's worth, I'm proud to marry into this family, but today you're the one I look up to." Tears stung my eyes, sudden and sharp. I blinked them back. "I hope one day," Megan said softly, "when I have a daughter, she speaks the way you did tonight." My throat tightened. I didn't know how to hold that kind of compliment. It felt like being handed something too valuable, too breakable, so I said the only thing I could manage. "Thank you." She nodded, then bumped her shoulder gently against mine. "Now come inside. They're about to cut the cake, and if you don't eat a slice, Aunt Darla will think it's a curse." I stood with her, legs stiff from sitting. "Do you think they're still whispering about me?" I asked. "Oh, definitely," she grinned. "But now, they're whispering with respect." And with that, we walked back into the venue, side by side. I wasn't a bridesmaid, but I'd never felt more seen. The wedding buzz had barely faded when Dad called a family dinner. No surprise there. Rick Ellison believed in two things after a major life event: leftovers and control. So 2 days later, we gathered back at the house. The same farmhouse I'd grown up in, where the porch groaned like it remembered every argument ever shouted through a screen door. Where the table still bore the faint heat rings from Mom's old canning pots. This time it was just us. Me, Wade, Megan, and Dad. No distractions, no guests, just the raw machinery of our family grinding against itself. Dinner was fried catfish, slaw, and sweet corn, Dad's peace offering, if you could call it that. He piled my plate without asking if I wanted any. Didn't ask Wade or Megan either. The conversation was stiff, mostly weather and prices. Until it was. About 3 bites in, Dad set his fork down with a loud clink and looked at me hard. "This startup fantasy ends now." No preamble, no grace. "Excuse me," I said, already knowing what was coming. "You've had your fun," he continued. "Made your little speech, embarrassed your family in front of 100 people. Now it's time to come back to reality." I blinked. "Reality? This farm," he said, gesturing around the room as if it were a courtroom. "This family, that's where you belong." Wade sat frozen, Megan's jaw tensed. You've got responsibilities, Dad pressed on. You live under this roof, you use this land, you benefit from everything we've built here, and now you want to run off and pretend you're some tech CEO. I'm not pretending, I said, my voice calm but firm. It's already real. I'm running something that matters. This matters, he barked, jabbing his finger into the table. This land, this work. I gave this land 18 years of unpaid labor, I replied. I've bled for this work, and now I'm choosing mine. You're being selfish. I laughed once, sharp and short. No, I said. For the first time, I'm being honest. Silence, thick as pond mud. Then Wade set down his fork with a thud. Dad, he said quietly, enough. Rick looked at him like he'd sprouted horns. What did you say? I said enough, Wade repeated. He looked straight at me, then back to our father. Joe built something real, and I want to learn from her. That silenced the room more than anything I could have said. Rick's face reddened. She's abandoning her roots, turning her back on us. No, Wade said, rising from his chair. You turned your back on her years ago, you just didn't notice. Megan reached over and took my hand under the table. I didn't look away from my father. Didn't flinch as his authority began to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but like old wood under pressure. You want to talk about roots? I asked, voice steady. Then maybe it's time to talk about what we're planting. Dad's lip curled. This is betrayal. No, I said. It's the first honest harvest this family's had. And I meant it. For the first time in this house, power shifted without yelling, only resolve, and in the silence that followed, I knew we would not go back. The farm looked different at dusk, not in the way the sun painted everything gold that had always happened. It was in the way the silence felt fuller, less like something was being buried, and more like something was finally being allowed to grow. 3 months had passed since the wedding. Since that dinner where Wade stood up and said the words I'd never dared hope for. Since Megan squeezed my hand under the table like a seal of something unspoken but solid. A lot had changed since then. Dad still lived on the property, but he'd stopped calling meetings. Stopped making announcements at breakfast like a foreman with unpaid workers. He didn't say much anymore, and when he did, it was quieter. Not humble, just unsure. The house didn't feel like a courtroom these days. It felt like a project site, a work in progress. Megan and Wade had moved into the South Cottage, the one Grandpa had once used for storing tractor parts and broken dreams. They'd cleaned it up, painted the porch swing, and strung lights across the beam rafters. Megan kept a basil plant by the window and a stack of business books by the crib, which now held the newest Ellison, Baby June. Named, she said, for new beginnings. That evening, Wade and I walked the edge of the back pasture, boots soft on the rows of straw and tilled lines. He carried a tablet now, not a clipboard. CropSync's dashboard pulled live satellite weather feeds and moisture data from a smart sensor we'd planted near the east fence. You think we should pivot from soy to winter wheat in this section? Wade asked, angling the screen toward me. I scanned the graph. Depends if you want fast cash or root health. Soils sell faster, but wheat'll build the soil better long-term. He nodded. Long-term, let's do that. 3 months ago, I never would have believed this was real. Wade taking my advice, asking instead of assuming. Not just tolerating my knowledge, but seeking it. And he wasn't the only one. Megan had convinced the board of their family's farm co-op to license CropSync for all their seasonal growers. We were onboarding 40 new users that month. Some had heard the wedding speech, others had just heard whispers. About the girl who'd once shoveled hay for free and was now building the platform every farmer wanted to use. We stopped near the old irrigation tank, rusted but still upright. Wade reached into his jacket and pulled out something I hadn't seen in months. Grandpa's watch. I had it cleaned, he said. New strap but kept the scratches. I figured they earned their place. I smiled. Like most things on this land. He slipped it on and turned to me. You know, for a long time I thought being a man meant following Dad's example, talking louder, taking credit, taking space. He paused. But now I think maybe being a man means learning when to listen. I looked at him, not the boy who used to toss feed bags at my feet, but the man walking beside me now, honest in a way I never imagined. We'll make it better this time, he said softly. And for once I didn't hesitate. Together, I replied. We reached the porch as the first stars appeared. Megan rocked June in the swing, humming something sweet and slow. The light from the cottage window cast a soft circle around her, like she was sitting in the center of something sacred. And maybe she was. I climbed the porch steps, feeling the weight on my shoulders lighten, not vanish, but shift. It no longer pulled me down. It grounded me. There was work to be done. Always. But for the first time in my life, the harvest felt like mine, too. 6 days later, we sat around a reclaimed wood table in a cozy farm-to-table restaurant just outside town. The kind of place that served buttermilk biscuits in cast iron pans and poured sweet tea into mason jars chilled with crushed ice. The kind of place where nobody rushed, where conversations lingered longer than dessert. Megan had picked it, of course she had. Thoughtful down to the last soft glow of candlelight and the small wildflower arrangement in a recycled milk jug at the center of the table. This dinner wasn't planned. It had started as a passing idea between Megan and Wade, then spiraled into a casual text chain. But everyone came. Even Rick. He sat across from me, not at the head of the table. His napkin sat folded in his lap, untouched. He hadn't spoken much, not since Megan's toast at the wedding. Not since my declaration, but he was here. That alone felt like a small miracle. Wade held June, bouncing her gently as she gurgled and waved a tiny hand in the air. Megan leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder for a moment before reaching for her tea. Across the table, Aunt Darla was debating pie flavors with one of Megan's cousins, and someone was telling a story about a tractor that had been possessed, or possibly just had a busted gear. Laughter flowed easily, the kind that didn't feel like a performance. For a long time, I just sat and listened, soaked it in. The rare, golden kind of evening where no one needed to fight to be heard. Eventually, Megan raised her glass. It was quiet enough now that everyone noticed. "I just wanted to say," she began, "that tonight feels like the start of something, not just another dinner, not just a new season on the farm, but something better, something more honest." She turned toward me. "And a lot of that is because of you, Joanna." All eyes shifted. I felt my breath catch. "You brought life into this family," Megan said, "but more importantly, you brought light." My eyes stung. I didn't try to blink it away. She reached for my hand, squeezing gently. Wade smiled at me over June's head, nodding like it was the most natural thing in the world. Even Rick didn't object. He sat still, watching, not beaming, not smiling, but not resisting either. I lifted my glass. "Thank you," I said, "all of you." Then, with a small laugh, "Especially Megan, for marrying into our chaos and somehow making it feel like home." Laughter rippled around the table again, warm and unforced. As I set my glass down, the candlelight caught on something at my wrist. My bracelet, leather band, silver clasp, and in the center, subtle but proud, was a small engraved charm. The CropSync logo. I hadn't meant to wear it tonight. I'd grabbed it out of habit. But now, as I caught Megan's eye, I knew it belonged here. It wasn't just a logo, it was proof. Proof that justice, while slow to sprout, could root deep, could grow into something real. Something that fed more than just the land, it fed the soul. Later that night, I stepped outside alone while the others waited for dessert. The stars were out again. Familiar, steady. Behind me, laughter floated through the restaurant doors. Voices of people who once looked right through me and now looked toward me. I took a deep breath of the autumn air, and for the first time in my life I felt it clear and clean. Not victory, not vengeance, but something far better, belonging.